Evening. It's Pastor Tom. This is the Midweek Connection, and thank you so much for joining me tonight. Here's the topic that we're talking about: when it seems like God is unfair to you. Do you feel that way sometimes? When you kind of look around and you see other people and you see what they have, or you see what you're going through that other people, it doesn't seem like they're going through that. Do you kind of feel sometimes that God is unfair to you? If you can see the picture underneath the lettering there of the one little fish there alone in the bowl, and then the other one with, it looks like some kind of a beach chair and a hat to provide shade. Does that kind of seem like you're the one on the left sometimes? Well, let's talk about that, because God gets it. God fully understands that sometimes we do feel that way. So what Jesus did, as recorded in the book of Matthew, is one day he tells the people around him, he tells them a story, a parable, which is, it wasn't a true account, but it's just a story with a purpose. It was to get them to think. And teachers commonly would teach in that day with parables, and it was just a normal type of things when people would be around a rabbi like Jesus, that they would talk in these ways of telling stories. So here's a story Jesus tells them, and he tells them this story so that they would think about this topic of whether or not he's being fair to them. So in Matthew 20:1-2, it says, "For the kingdom of heaven," whenever you see this phrase, kingdom of heaven, it's basically means what it's like to be a believer, or when you're in God's care, when you're in a relationship with God, it's like this. That's sort of what kingdom of heaven means. So for the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. So let's do a little bit of description here of this verse. Again, the kingdom of heaven, or a relationship with God, or being in God's care, is like a landowner who goes out early in the morning and he goes to hire workers. Now, these workers were what was known as day workers, and these were people that would gather in the kind of like the marketplace or the center of town. They would gather there looking for work for the day. These were people that, for whatever reason, did not have a steady full-time job. And who knows why? It could have been maybe because of their abilities or because of their age, maybe so young, or maybe people thought they were too old, or their strength. Who knows why? But these are people that just weren't able to to get a steady full-time job. So they would go to the marketplace and they would wait each day for a landowner or someone that required some manual work to be done to come through and hire them. Now, the days would typically last from 6 in the morning to 6 at night. And so it says the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner. And by the way, the landowner here is representing God. It's like a landowner who went out early in the morning. So he goes out maybe at 5:30 or so to try to find a worker or workers for the day. He goes out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard, and he finds some, and he agrees to pay them a denarius for the day, and then he sends them to the vineyard. So a denarius is a day's wage in that day, and that's the amount of money that a Roman soldier would have earned for the day. All right, so you've got God represented as a landowner, and this landowner apparently realizes that he needs more workers for this particular day to bring the harvest in or whatever type of work that he was needing done. And so he goes and he hires some day workers, people who couldn't find work any other way, hires them, and he agrees, or what he promises them is to pay them a day's wage, a denarius, and then he sends them on to the vineyard. So let's go on with this story. The story goes on, and it says in Matthew 20, verse 3, says, now about 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. So he is the landowner, or again, representing God. So apparently now 3 hours into the workday, the landowner realizes that he doesn't have enough people yet to get in the amount of work that he needs done. And so realizing this, he goes back into the marketplace to look for other people. And there's more people there who weren't able to get hired the first time around when other people came looking for workers. So they've been standing there for 3 hours looking for work. So the landowner comes, and it says, again, about 9 in the morning, he went out, saw others standing there in the marketplace doing nothing. And he told them, you also go into my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right. And so they went. Notice here, it says that the landowner says, not that he says, I'm going to pay you a denarius like he did the others, but he said, I'm going to treat you in a right way. I'm going to be good to you. I'm going to be right to you. He doesn't talk about the wage, though. He just says, I'm going to treat you right. Now, I just want to say in regards to the topic tonight, and the topic again is when it seems like God is unfair to you. I just want to say that the whole idea sometimes that we have of God is fair or not fair is not really the best way to view it. Because if you think about it, what does that mean, that God would be fair to everybody? Does that mean that God gives every single person the same amount of sunshine and the same amount of rain in their life? Does that mean that God gives everybody an exact equal amount of money? Or does God give everyone the same exact amount of smiles, good things, joy, and then the same amount of tough things that happen in life. What does that really mean, that God is fair and not fair? If you're a parent or a grandparent, if you think of that in terms of your own child or grandchild, is it really possible to give every child the exact same thing in the same amounts? And does it mean that you're not fair if one child at one point gets a little bit more, the other child gets a little bit less? It really isn't like that with God. Instead, if you look back to this verse, God uses the word right. With God, it's not really about fair and unfair. It's about what is right. And God treats us right. Let's go on and look at verse 5 through 7. He went out again about noon and also about 3 in the afternoon, and he did the same thing. So again, about noon and 3 o'clock, he goes out and he looks to hire more workers because he still needs more work to be done. And who knows why? There could have been bad weather that slowed the workers down. We don't really know why, but he needs still yet more people. So he goes out and he wants to hire more. And so he goes and he finds people who were unable to find work at 6 o'clock in the morning when other people came looking for jobs. These were people that basically the other landowners or people that had jobs didn't want these people. They were picked over. Other people were picked instead of them. And so these are people still looking for work now, and they're there at noon, and the landowner goes and he hires them. And again, the idea is he's going to pay them what is right. And then at 3, he does the same thing. And then also it says about 5 in the afternoon. Remember now, the workday lasts from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night. So about 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around, and he asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" And then here's what they said: "Because no one has hired us," they answered. In other words, we've been picked over. There's other people that were stronger. There's other people that were deemed to be more capable, or there's other people that were younger than us, or whatever the case might have been. They weren't the ones who were the most hireable, and others were chosen. And so it says the landowner comes and he hires them at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock p.m., and the workday ends at 6. And he says to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." Again, let's talk about this. In God's way of looking things, you really can't judge him as being fair and unfair. As I said before, how do you really determine that? What is fair and unfair? Because we live in a world that is broken. We live in a world that is unfair. This entire environment that we live in is unfair. And would it even be recognizable? Would it even be a world that we would want to live in if everything was exactly equal in the amount, again, that everyone has the exact same amount of money, everybody has the exact type of house, everybody has the exact amount of joy and the exact amount of hardships that they go through? That's really not the way life is, especially in a broken world. And so when we start comparing ourselves and wondering, well, it seems like they have more than I do. They have a better house than I do. They have a great marriage. And when we start to do that, that really isn't fair. If you want to say fair, that's really not fair to God. Instead, God views things as right and wrong. He always does the right for us. Now let's go on and look more at this passage of scripture. We go to verses 8 through 10, and it says, when evening came, now again, this is, so when 6 o'clock comes, the end of the workday, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going to the first. Now you see what's happening here, right? I mean, you can get the kind of the drama in all of this. The people that have been there and been working from 6 o'clock in the morning to the evening, they were promised a denarius for their day's work, or a day's pay for their work. And then they see that throughout the day, other people are coming in. There's people that come in at 9 o'clock, and there's people that come in at noon to work, and there's people that come in at 3, and then there's even people that come in at 5. And you know how it is as human beings, we're all kind of calculating this whole thing of what's fair and not fair. Now, I've been working since 6 in the morning, and it's 6 at night now. I've worked 12 hours, so certainly I will get paid more. Now, remember, they were promised a denarius, a day's wage. So again, their assumption would be that those who get there at 5 would just get just a very, very small amount of money given to them, or those that got there at 3 o'clock or at noon would get much less. So here's how the story continues. It says, call the workers, pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius. You know what's going through their mind. You know what goes through all of our minds. We've served you, God, for all of these years, and we've done this and that. We've dedicated ourselves to you. We've not gone into this lifestyle. And then there's other people that just kind of come casually to you, and you accept them and you treat them exactly in the same way that you do me, and I deserve so much more. I deserve to be treated far better than that person down the street who's not good to their kids. And look at the good things that they've got in their life. You know how it is with us. We kind of do this mental calculating as we compare ourselves to other people. And so again, scripture says everyone got a denarius, a day's wage. Verse 11, when they received it, and when the people that had been working from 6 in the morning, when they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. Remember, the landowner here represents God. They began to grumble against the landowner, and they said, these who were hired last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them, look how it terms this here, you've made them equal to us. Interesting phrase. Interesting the way it's said here. It's really not in their mind. it doesn't all have to do with the fact that they're getting more money, but now it's like who's better and who's not as good, who doesn't quite meet up to the standard. Now it's like better and worse. They're worse than us as people, and here you're treating them in exactly the same way. And they go on in their complaint and they say, you've made them equal to us, us, the ones that have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. But he answered them. The landowner answers them. God answers and says, I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. And then it says in verse 14 through 15, I want to give you, this is the landowner talking, I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Now look at this next statement. Don't I have the right to do what I want to do with my money? God is saying, if I want to do that, don't I have the right? If I want to allow someone to have a higher paying job than you, do I not have that right? If I want someone to have a bigger house than you, or I allow them to have a bigger house than you, do I not have that right? And again, in our mind, we say, well, yes, you do, but it's not fair. And now we get back to that whole thing. What is fair? And could life really be done that way? And if you're a parent or a grandparent, can you really do that with your kids? Or instead, do you do what's right? Sometimes as parents or grandparents, it really isn't about fair. It might seem unfair the way we're deciding, to do things for our kids, but that's not the ultimate thing that we're after. We're after instead what is right. And sometimes right, what is best, doesn't seem fair to the child or to us. But once again, let me say that's really not the best way to try to figure this out. It's what is right in the way God is doing this. Now look at what he says next. He says, again, God says, or the landowner says, or are you envious because I am generous? Is this really about envy? Is this really about coveting something that someone else has that you don't have? Are you envious because of my generosity? Let's just take one more closer look at this as we end this passage. Now, once again, be careful of the fair versus unfair lens that a lot of times we look at life through, and we look at God through. Let's be careful of that, because fair and unfair isn't the best way to determine how good God is. Instead, it's what is right, what is best, what he thinks in his grand plan for us in our life, what he thinks is best, knowing the future, knowing our personality, knowing everything of our past and our present, knowing everything about us, what he thinks is right. That's the best way to look at it. God works from the right versus wrong lens. Now, I want you to look at this next statement. God doesn't owe us anything. God didn't owe, or the landowner didn't owe those people anything more than what he promised. He promised them a denarius. So in other words, he promised to treat them fairly. And by the way, remember now, these were people that couldn't get a job on a regular basis. These were people, for whatever reason, weren't hireable. No one determined that they were worthy enough to hire them every day on a regular basis. Instead, these are the people that couldn't get work. And that's not a statement by me to say that people that don't have a job aren't worthy or unhireable. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying in this situation, these are people that for whatever reason, they were not able to get work. And so they were all very blessed that someone would come and hire them. Every single one of them were blessed. And to get a denarius in that day, the pay of a Roman soldier was an amazing thing, because the Roman soldiers were among the highest people in kind of the everyday working people's class. They were among the highest paid people. And so to get a denarius was an amazing thing. God doesn't owe us anything. In fact, he's treating these people very good. Next, let me make this statement. Don't look down at the 5 p.m. workers. Let's be careful when we're in this fair and unfair thinking, because when we start thinking of fair and unfair, in other words, God's treating us fair, that's saying that we are so deserving of much better because of the way we are, the way we act. And so to not treat us in the way that we think you should treat us, God, is just unfair. But then we also include the thought of, if we think we're so worthy of getting so much great treatment from God, then what comes next is we also think other people aren't as worthy. Other people don't quite measure up in the same way that we do. And it just all comes along with this fair and unfair thinking. So let's be careful not to look down at the people that we think don't deserve it, because that whole thing is wrapped up in pride. Next, be grateful for what you do have. Part of the lesson here of this story is Jesus is saying all of you should be grateful, whether you've been working from 6 o'clock or started at 5 p.m. You should be grateful, because none of you deserve a denarius. None of you deserve the pay that you're getting. None of you deserve what you're getting in life. Neither do I. We should be grateful for what we have. Here's another thought. How about being happy for how God blesses someone else, instead of being jealous, or we just can't be happy when someone gets a nice car, because there's this moment of, oh, that's nice. And then why didn't I get, all of that is just wrapped up in ungratefulness for what God has given us. How about that we challenge ourselves to actually be happy when God blesses someone else? Why not be happy for the person who started to work at 5 o'clock? Because these were the people in the story who were picked over all day long. They weren't picked at 6 in the morning. They weren't picked at 9 or at noon or at 3, because they were the most undesirable of all the undesirables. So the challenge is, why not be happy that these people got treated so well. And then the last thought is the landowner actually was showing kindness to every single person in the story. He was showing incredible grace to everyone there. So there was a single father who was struggling just to make ends meet and was just, in all honesty, kind of feeling sorry for himself because he works himself like crazy and he doesn't have his kids all the time. He has to, only have them for a week on, a week off, and he's just feeling bad. He sees other families that are all together, and there's a happy dad and a happy mom, and he wishes that he could have that, and he feels God's treated him unfair, and he's upset. But then somebody else who doesn't have children and has wanted to have children looks at that single father and says, oh, how blessed he is. He's so lucky. God has blessed him so much to have those beautiful children. Why can't God bless me? And then there was a person who had very bad health, who looked at the person that looked at the single father and said, I would love to have the health that single father does. All of us have this tendency to want somebody else's life. All of us have this tendency to not be happy with what we have, when in reality, God has blessed us all so much. And it's not about God being fair or unfair. It's really a matter of right versus wrong. And the fact that God, regardless of how you compare yourself to other people, or regardless of what others have a bigger house, or others have more money, or others have kids, other people have a marriage, we really need to get off of that whole idea of looking at life through that lens. Instead, it's that we should look at life as how blessed we are and how many people would love to have what we have. Or even the poorest person in the world, they've got things that other people, would love to have. It's just, let's learn to be happy with the life God has given us and stop viewing it as fair and unfair. He or she has more, and I'm so, life stinks because God's treating me so bad. Let's get off of that and just understand we're blessed and thank God. Thanks for being here with me tonight. Those of you that are online, Lori and Kevin and Dee and Lauren and Leslie, great to have you. And Holly, good to see you here online. Kathy and others that I'm probably not seeing now that have been online. Others that are listening that aren't even checked in right now. And others that will be hearing this throughout the week. Hey, if you're in town on locally here on Sunday morning, we have a wonderful service planned. Some of our youth are going to be leading. We're also going to hear from our youth group as they've just less than 2 weeks ago had this wonderful convention that they were at, and they want to tell us about that and all the good things that are going on in the youth group. just going to be a good time. And I hope to see you there at the Ithaca Church of God at 10:30 again if you're here locally. And thanks for joining me tonight. Check out my blog at 24today.org. That's 24today.org. And I'll see you next week, if not before then, for the Midweek Connection.